India's External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar, shortly after his visit to Germany, dismissed arguments that BRICS is unnecessary and said that he was amazed by the insecurity felt by the developed nations about the group, which includes China, Russia and 6 other nations. Jaishankar, while speaking at the Global Center for Security Policy in Switzerland's Geneva, said if the G7 can exist alongside the G20, there is no reason why BRICS cannot exist. Jaishankar questioned why there is opposition to BRICS, especially when groups like G7 continue to exist alongside the G20. Jaishankar said that if the G7, a group of advanced economies, can remain intact despite the presence of the G20, then BRICS, a coalition of the emerging economies, should also be allowed to exist. Meanwhile, the US President Joe Biden will host the 4th in-person Quad Leader Summit in Delaware on September 21st, the White House has announced. The summit will bring together Prime Minister Narendra Modi, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese of Australia and Prime Minister Fumio Kishida of Japan. The upcoming summit will focus on strengthening strategic alignment among the 4 nations and advancing a shared vision of a free and open Indo-Pacific region. Discussions will cover key issues like health, security, disaster response, maritime security, infrastructure development, emerging technologies, climate change, clean energy and cyber security as well. Let's listen in first to what External Affairs Minister Jaishankar actually said in Geneva that has really made the headlines.
Why the BRICS was necessary given the fact that the G20 exists. But I heard your answer.
Yeah, but I must tell you, I'm still struck by how insecure the North is when you speak about the BRICS.
There is a club, the BRICS.
Mm-hmm.
Why this club? And do you consider that the BRICS will expand?
Well, to be honest, why the club? Because there was another club. It was called the G7 and you wouldn't let anybody else into that club. So we said we go and form our own club. So we decided, okay, we are also, good citizens of good standing who have a place in the global society, and therefore this is how typically clubs multiply. So it started, and as it started, like many clubs, it gained a life of its own. Over a period of time, others saw value in it as well. So in a sense, I would say, it's actually a very interesting group, because if you look at it, typically any club or any group has either a geographical contiguity or some common historical experience, or very strong economic connect. There are some orthodox binding factors.
And joining me on the debate today is Ambassador Ashok Sajanhar, former Indian diplomat, and Dr. Swasti Rao, Associate Fellow, MP, IDSA, and expert on Russia-Ukraine affairs. Ambassador Sajanhar, let me begin by asking you, what was your takeaway? You heard, Jaishankar. And over the last 3 years, I've observed this thing, that while speaking in Europe especially, Dr. Jaishankar is, almost habitual of showing the mirror to the West, especially Europe, be it on energy takeaway from Russia, be it on an independent, sovereign, stand being taken on the key issues, including the Russia-Ukraine war. And this time around on the groupings, really, the G7 and the BRICS. What's your takeaway? Is it G7, which is a restricted club where others are not allowed completely, and was the kind of a quip that they took on BRICS really required?
Yeah, thank you very much, Aditya. I think the first comment that you made as to why is it that Dr. Jaishankar sort of has been able to respond in the manner that he's been able to when he's in Europe. I think the Europeans asked for it. Whenever the questions that have been posed, I think it should really be very clear to them as to what is the response going to be.
Right.
I think to the credit also of Dr. Jaishankar, I would say that he is not aggressive in any way. He is not offensive in any way. He is not pugilistic in any way. But he still pushes back against whatever suggestion that is coming from, whoever his interlocutor might be. Mm-hmm. He gently but firmly pushes them back And I think his answers are rooted in fact and the reality of the situation. Because if you look at it, what is, the question that was asked, why does BRICS need to exist today? I think we have to go back to 2001 when, the whole idea of BRICS came up. And the idea was that the emerging market economies were not getting their due in the world. So they had to come together. And at that time, you would recall when, Jim O'Neill had come up from Goldman Sachs, had come up with this idea. It was said that these would be large countries that are large in territorial area, large in population, large in terms of economic size. And they will come together and they will have a very important role to play. After that, you remember the first meeting of the BRICS foreign ministers took place in 2006. The first summit took place in 2009 in Yekaterinburg in Russia. And after that, of course, as far as BRICS is concerned, there has been no looking back. They have been moving forward. Right now, of course, it is, BRICS is evolving into much more than just an economic grouping of emerging market economies. It has very many political connotations, because if you look at the expansion that took place, 5 countries original members, or 4 countries original members of BRICS, South Africa added in 2010, and then last year at the Johannesburg summit, we have 6 other countries also added, out of which Argentina drops out, so we have now 10 members. But the 5 that have been added, Aditya, I would like to underline that, that the original criterion of large area, large population, large economy, they have not been adhered to. And right now it is becoming, of course, an economic grouping, but also an equally, if not more so, a political grouping. And I think that is what is making the Western nations particularly nervous and uncomfortable. Aditya.
But Ambassador Ashok Sajanhar, let me put it, very boldly here. That do you think that India's rise, India's diplomatic rise, India's stature increasing over the last few years is being seen by the West as a direct threat to the global governance structures, to the kind of multilateral systems that have been adopted, or the kind of definitions of democracy that have been imposed, perhaps also with the rise of the global South over the last 2 to 3 years, the way India adopted, Africa as a permanent member of the G20 as well. And finally, now we see BRICS directly being attacked. So is there some kind of apprehension among the West of India's rise, and that perhaps is the real reason of these kind of statements time and again coming in from Europe?
To be very candid, I don't think so. In my view, the world wants India to succeed. The world wants India to succeed both economically as well as politically, strategically, and security-wise. And there are different reasons for that, because if it is a significant military power, significant political power, then of course, whether it is the United States or Europe, they are looking at the threat and the challenge that is being posed by China. So can India be a good, a reasonable, effective counterpoise to that? Even as far as economically, it is economics. Today India is accounting for 17% of the global GDP growth, which is a significant growth. So the more that India grows, the more will it be beneficial for the global economy, and the world really wants that. The last point I want to make here is that they would much rather have a democracy with whom they have some differences on some issues or the other grow and occupy its rightful place in the world, rather than have, according to them, autocracies like China and Russia growing, rising, and occupying much bigger space.
I'll request you to hold your thoughts there. Very important points there by Ambassador Ashok Sajanhar. Dr. Swasti Rao joins us live from Europe right now. Dr. Rao, what did you infer from the statement of External Affairs Minister Jaishankar? And what do you think was the message really for the West when he said that BRICS equally deserves a right to exist if the G7 does alongside the G20?
Well, yes, I think it's self-explanatory, which is that the first thing is that just like G7 or G20, the BRICS or any other grouping, multilateral grouping especially, has every right to exist. That's the first thing. The second thing is that it is also a suggestion to Europe to learn to ask intelligent questions, because it is very strange that even after so many conversations, especially strategic conversations and convergences that we have with Europe today, we are still in a situation where we are asked these extremely basic elementary questions. So I personally think that for every single time Dr. Jaishankar is in Europe, he also gives a slight nudge, okay, to
Yes.
the European journalists to
Yes.
actually learn a little bit more about where India is coming from and what is the Indian strategic context and the history has been. So I guess it's pretty much that. On a different note, I think just because a grouping has a right to exist doesn't mean that there are no problems. Of course, we are all aware of the fact that every grouping would come with its own internal, pulls and pressures and tensions. So, of course, we have our own view on the BRICS expansion. There is no doubting the fact that, Global South and more countries of the Global South who wish to keep their options open in a very uncertain world are definitely looking at BRICS. And one of the reasons why they look at BRICS is because of the presence of India. So, adding to what Ambassador Sajjanar has already said and not repeating that, I think I would be very brief and say that it is in many ways the fact that there is a group of countries in the world that do not adhere, to what the Western countries would perhaps believe in. And in that regard, they do look at India in terms of being the voice and the leader of what their real, genuine concerns are. And India is very, I would say, wonderfully placed today as this growing economy that has excellent ties with the West. So we no
Right.
longer have any, conflict per se. So it would be wrong to convey that we are in some perpetual conflict with the West. I think not only the defense minister, but the external affairs minister have said it again and again from different platforms that yes, these are one of the most important strategic partnerships for India. But despite that, it does not take away from the fact that India has its own worldview, is entitled to have its own worldview, and it is good for the world to have the Indian worldview.
We've seen over the last few weeks and months, India put out a very strong, comment on how India views the Russia-Ukraine war. Prime Minister Modi was one of the first leaders to say that this is not an era of war. Solutions really cannot be found in a battlefield. And thereafter, we've seen, of course, the National Security Advisor Ajit Doval in Russia, the External Affairs Minister in Germany, again talking about some kind of a diplomacy and negotiation. Do you think there isn't much reconciliatory kind of a message or a tone coming in from the West, and West doesn't seem like has reached a stage where they actually want to sit on the dialogue table and have a peace plan with Russia, and perhaps would at least wait till the end of the US elections?
Yeah, so I think the world wants India to take an initiative, because I think India has truly proved itself to be the bridge between the East and the West, whether it is, Russia or, on one side of the Ukraine conflict, and the Western countries, Europe, US, and Ukraine, and also North and South, since we were talking about BRICS earlier. So, North and the South also, it is, I think there are hardly any other country in the world which can go today to both to Russia as well as to Ukraine and get the same sort of welcome and respect, and have a dialogue, have a conversation on how we can move forward, how we can deal with this particular issue. So I think he has been able to convey certain messages and certain, as the Prime Minister himself has called, certain interesting ideas from Moscow to Kiev and vice versa. And he's also kept President Biden also in the loop. And now we know that there's going to be another meeting with President Biden. You mentioned yourself, the fourth in-person Quad Summit takes place in Delaware on the 21st.
Right.
So I think there will be that opportunity. And in addition to what your two comments that you made, Aditya, yourself,
Yeah.
one is not an era of war. Number two, no solutions on the battlefield, and that there has to be, the end has to be through negotiations, through diplomacy. And India has positioned itself in such a way that we are willing and ready to help in whatever way we can. But I think, of course, the ultimate decision as to how they want to go forward will have to be between the two warring parties. You know, it is a mediator coming and saying, trying to bring the two parties when they themselves are not ready. That will not work. That will not succeed. So I think India has made its position very clear that we have best of both sides in view. We know that the Russia-Ukraine conflict is creating problems, not only for these two countries, not only for Europe, but for the whole world. You know, when we saw the shortages of food, fossil fuels, fertilizers, etc., and supply chain disruptions that have taken place. So it is good for the whole world if the conflict comes to an end. And India is willing to play its role as and when these two parties want it and need it.
Fair enough. One last comment from you briefly, Ambassador Sajanhar, is about the Quad summit that is really going to happen. We've seen considerable delays in this, and now we know that the United States, in fact, has switched the roles from India. Will be hosting it this year, and India would be taking over next year. But is this merely a symbolic exercise ahead of the elections in the United States, a message of sorts that Biden administration would like to send across, particularly to China, ahead of the elections, and perhaps domestically could help them out? Or do you think that there would be a larger message that will involve the Quad countries during the summit?
Thank you, Aditya. I think that's an excellent question and very relevant question. Let's look at the evolution of the Quad over the last 3.5 years since President Biden came to power. As soon as he was sworn in on the 21st of January, the first virtual Quad summit, first ever virtual Quad summit, took place in March of 2021. That is within 2 months.
Right.
The first in-person took place in September 2021. The second in-person in Tokyo, May 22, and the third in-person in Hiroshima, again in May 22. You know, the Quad countries are being very innovative and very creative because it had become clear quite some time that India will not be able to host the summit this year because the US president will not be able to travel there.
Right.
And in any case, after he withdrew from the race, you know, there was no sense of his going and for that particular summit. But like in 23, you would recall that President Biden was in Hiroshima. He was to go to Sydney for the Australia summit, but he had to come back quickly. He could not, he cancelled his visit both to Papua New Guinea as well as to Sydney because of, certain negotiations in the Congress. So the countries decided that they will have the summit in Hiroshima itself on the sidelines of the G7 summit, for which all of them were there. So this time also, I think a very good, clever via media has been found. So there are two reasons. One, substantively, it's going to be very important because I would draw your attention to the meeting of the foreign ministers of the Quad that took place in Tokyo on the 29th of July. A very substantive meeting, a very substantive declaration. So taking the elements you mentioned about the free and open Indo-Pacific, freedom of navigation, freedom of overflights, etc. All that is there, but I think the agenda is being significantly expanded. Secondly, the messaging, the symbolism. That's also very important. Why do I say that? Because if the summit had not happened, there are very many naysayers and doubters who would have said that, these major players, America, India, etc., they have lost interest in this. It is not having any traction. So I think it was, for symbolism also, it was extremely important that a summit should take place. And I think next year when India hosts the summit, it's going to be very significant because you will have a new US president. You will have a new Japanese prime minister. So I think it will be able to have a sort of a fresh start in taking the Quad and sort of, taking forward all the decisions that have been taken, and how to actualize them, how to implement them on the ground.
When we are actually talking about the message from the Quad and its new kind of an avatar next year when India hosts it, and what the message would be for China, I want to finally ask you a last question, Ambassador Sajanhar, about the mediation that India has been trying to do, or at least offered, in respect to Russia and Ukraine. We saw NSA Ajit Doval also in Russia meeting Putin. We heard an audio of it as well. But could Russia also be trying to mediate between India and China? We saw the meeting between Doval and Wang Yi taking place. We've seen considerable developments over the last few years, ever since Galwan, military as well as diplomatic dialogue taking place. Jaishankar also mentioning that 75% of the issues have been tackled till now. What do you think could be Russia's role in it, which is close to both China and India?
Yeah, again, an interesting question. I think basically Russia's role is to provide a platform where both sides can meet, can discuss. I don't think it is wanting to have a role beyond that. I would like to draw your attention. If you remember, in 2020, just after Galwan had taken place, Russia was the chair of SCO.
Yeah.
There was the foreign ministers of the SCO who were meeting. On the 4th of September, if my memory serves me correctly, Mr. Rajnath Singh was there in Moscow, and he met his Chinese counterpart, Chinese defense minister, to discuss the Galwan issue. It was very, very fresh at that time. In June it had taken place, September they were meeting. On the 10th of September, Dr. Jaishankar and Wang Yi was again the foreign minister at that time. In between we had an interregnum when another foreign minister, Chinese foreign minister came. But
right.
In 2020 it was Wang Yi. The point I'm making is at that time also, it was the platform that was provided, that on the sidelines of the SCO meetings that took place in Moscow, that these meetings were organized. Similarly, this time also, when Mr. Doval is there and his counterpart Wang Yi, who's there for the BRICS for NSA's meeting. So that also they provide an opportunity that you get together and try to sort out. But let's face it, Dr. Jaishankar has met Wang Yi twice last month. Once on the sidelines in Astana, on the sidelines of the SCO summit, and then again in Laos on the sidelines of the ASEAN foreign ministers meeting. So I think the opportunities are there. Several opportunities present themselves because our leaders are moving from one place to the other so very frequently.
Yes.
But I don't think, to come to your question, I don't think Russia has any more of a role to play in terms of bringing them together, meaning it keeps on voicing that it will be good for the world, it will be good for these countries if they're able to resolve their differences, and it would like to encourage both of them. But I think beyond that,
Fair enough.
I don't think there's any role for Russia.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We'll have to wait and watch how the West really takes that googly of External Affairs Minister Jaishankar on G7, on understanding BRICS more. But we are living in a deeply divided world, and certainly there's more to witness from BRICS to SCO to, in fact, the G20 later this year. Thank you very much, Ambassador Ashok Sajanhar, for your valued opinions.
Thank you.
And hope to see you again very soon. And Dr. Swasti Rao for joining us. Thank you very much.